Welcome to the bold analysis. On 7th July 1990, 23 years ago, late Kenneth Matiba and Charles Rubia chose Kamkundi grounds as the place they were going to speak to Kenyans. And they did not disappoint, making the political statement that made a landmark as far as the second liberation was concerned. And they said that the Kanu Moi dictatorship was unacceptable and that Kenya needed a multipartism system immediately. That would then start protracted war and struggle that yielded the multi-party democracy 2 years later in 1992. This was a show of patriotic courage that the two suffered for, and remember, immediately they were arrested and detained while suffering health issues. Following the courage of the mothers after their arrest, the mothers of prisoners, political prisoners, gathered at the Freedom Corner at Uhuru Park demanding the immediate release of their sons. And after their brutal attack by the police there, they were given, supported by All Saints Cathedral. They stayed there until their sons were released. Ladies and gentlemen, I was giving you that short anecdote of the Sabasaba of 1990 as we try to draw comparison and share into the thoughts of former Chief Justice Mutunga, Chief Justice Emeritus Mutunga, who is saying that the Sabasaba liberation that we have today will succeed and can only succeed when we consider some 4 factors I want us to look at in this podcast. He's reacted to that, and the 1992 Sabasaba movement protest were actually supported by some civil society organizations. Now, that is a close similarity to what we are having now. But before we get into those details, allow me to remind you about this beautiful lady here. Sarah Tiedu suffered acute leukemia last year, and she was in the hospital for more than 7 months. And as the Bold family, we came in for her and supported her medication by over 1.3 million. But as God will have the fate, we lost Sarah on 26th June in Kenyatta Hospital while she was going through the chemotherapy. But as you will know, and for those who have already been part of Sarah's life, even after we released her from the hospital, I'm just so grateful for that, because through this family, Bold family, Sarah got a lot of support even after, and I'm just so grateful that we still hang around. The family is overwhelmed and demanding, or rather asking for us to come and support. We have still pending bills, the mortuary bills for the last expense, the welfare of the boy that she's left, and also the medical bill that was still hanging there. So we are still reaching out to you in a special way that let's finish the last challenge for Sarah, at least 100 bob challenge, so that on Friday next week, 15th, 14th, we'll be able to meet the burial obligations. And thank you for those who are responding. I want to move swiftly to what the Chief Justice is talking about. And he's saying that from the Sabasaba, the 1990 Sabasaba, the country Kenya later saw the fruits when we actually got the multi-party democracy, thriving of opposition parties, and a convention about changing the constitution. But look at it, 20 years later, in 2010, the country got its first own constitution. And Chief Justice is saying it all started from that Sabasaba. What is the message? The message is very clear to Azimio la Umoja team and all the concept bearers around the Sabasaba, that they must envision what the second liberation team did by making sure that there were clear timelines and strategy for it to benefit the people. I have looked in Twitter, and the hashtag that is trending there is very catchy. In fact, there are two. One, Sabasaba March for Our Lives. I just like it that way. Then, of course, there is other hashtag that has also been sponsored by the government propaganda team, that hashtag Mandamano. And it is coming at a time when Kenyans are struggling with bills. The narrative should never be about us going to sit together to solve the problems. But what Chief Justice is saying is that there are some standards we must meet. Number one, the unitary liberation struggle plan must be accompanied by achievable objectives, but it must also have political mobilization plan. This is it. Azimio la Umoja, or rather those who are pro the Sabasaba, are offering alternative leadership. What others say the opposition? They're offering the alternative leadership because the problems that Kenyans are going through are actually problems on unmet pledges. I read a tweet from, I saw that from a blogger, Ruto's blogger, and that blogger was saying that we should not judge Ruto on what he said during the campaign trail, but we should judge Ruto on what he's doing now. That what he's doing now, are they yielding fruits? Or should we compare what he's doing to what he said? And someone should help us here. What Ruto is doing now and what he said, should we compare what he said and what he's doing? Because that blog was simply telling us that we should not judge Ruto that he's not doing what he said at the campaign trail. We should judge him on what she's doing now for the 8 months or the 9 months that she's been in power. Is she doing something? You know, the challenge here, and it was a very laughable narrative because Kenyans voted with some expectations. And if you're telling us that we should not look at what he promised, then you're simply telling us that the campaign manifesto was just a trap to get people's votes, then turn into someone else or something else. I looked at it. So Chief Justice is saying that it must be a campaign. You know, the Sabasaba of the 1990s, there was something that was achieved. Now, this one here, if it's going to be the start, what is it going to achieve? They must have that. If it is going to be a constitutional review process, and if it is going to be a political movement that can yield, that can even eject Ruto in power, they must have it clearly. Because if you read, you know, I really liked reading articles on the 1992 elections where Moi had to break Matiba and Jaramogi. Because if the two would have been together, if you would merge votes zenye Matiba alipata na Jaramogi alipata, wangetoa Moi. They had a unitary force, the Battle of Ford. But the Ford was again splitted. It yielded the Ford, but it was split when it was at its peak. Mutunga is saying that the Sabasaba concept bearers must breathe life to politics of issues and avoid divisive politics. I said in my previous podcast clearly, the reason why William Ruto would not want to really is very uncomfortable about the current Sabasaba discussion going on is because the Sabasaba rallies or the protests that are being planned are not majorly centered on us versus them, but they are centered on issues. And they're not majorly political issues. You know, for the first time, if you've seen the discussion, I've just seen the clips. There's some 2 clips. I think I can play those clips for you. Yeah, there are these 2 clips. Look at them.
Yes. Article 43 of our Constitution gives us a right to socio-economic issues, including right to food, right to basic things, including movement. As it is today, we have very many families that cannot afford 3 meals a day. In fact, many cannot even afford a meal a day. We are unable to move from one point to another. Moving from your place of residence to your place of work is becoming impossible, where you can generate income for the government to tax you. Tomorrow, we have an opportunity to join other Kenyans and tell this government enough is enough. When we cannot meet our basic needs as human beings, that government has no reason to be in power, or let me put it differently. Those who are in office of government, led by the president himself, Amaudi Anajiita president, has no right to remain there. And tomorrow is a day for us to say loudly, enough is enough. This high cost of living must be brought down, must be reduced.
Dear Kenyans, if you're feeling the pinch of high cost of living, if the price of petrol is unbearable to you as it is to all of us, if the price of food is unbearable to you as it is to all of us, wherever you are, come out tomorrow as Sabasaba Day and have your voice heard.
Now, if you listen to those clips, those gentlemen are actually, that is Nderetu Murithi and Jeremiah Kioni. They're not talking about IBC. They're not talking about the server. So the second phase of the mass action is it's exclusively on the cost of living. Now, I remember this is something that political observers, I say it as strategists, Azimio strategists, needed to stick to that line. But by that time, there was a lot of baggage of the server, the IEBC, you know, there was a lot of other baggages. But now, they're sticking to one question, the cost of living. Bring down the cost of living. So, it must be centered, and that is what Mutunga is saying. It must be centered on non-divisive issues, because that then will negate the whole thing. The other thing, we must challenge the foreign influence in our politics. For us to achieve the cause, we must be able to go challenge the foreign influence. You know, in this country, we are in a country where US will always call leaders, make night calls and engineer some, you know, some arrangement, some gentleman arrangement between politicians, and the bigger dream is dropped. Because there is a lot of international interests vested in the country. And that is why he's saying we must be willing, able to challenge the foreign influence. Whether Azimio is going to get the backing of the superpowers or not, or whether they are going to fight against the regime that is getting the support of the superpowers, they must be ready and willing not to bend to the foreign influence. And lastly, this is my punchline. The youth, men and women must know that the liberation is in their shoulders. I think I like this. it is in their shoulders. We've always been saying, what do Raila have to do with liberation? I think he's in late ages, needs to rest, you know. So if you are seated somewhere and someone is telling you it's about Raila, it's about so, I think yourself you need to do some personal introspecting and find out really if the cost of fuel is high and you're having a discussion about it, is it really about Raila? You know, that message was very clear, targeting the youth, that it must start and end with them. If you want to know that what this point is very important is, just do some flashback in the last election. The voting bloc that politicians, if you look at the messaging in the campaign trail, the voting bloc that politicians spent time, resources, and propaganda trying to win is this group of the youth and the women. The whole church euphoria, the religious organizations that are being organized and Harambes done in church was just a hula baloo to woo the women. And the whole hustler story was simply targeting the urban youth. I don't know what's your take. And this is a very candid podcast here. That what would make Sabasaba? What do you expect, by the way? For me, I expect some very powerful messaging tomorrow. I'm also expecting a roadmap. What are they going to do in the next years? The fruits might not be like instantly. But can it yield pressure for the current administration? That's my take. And let's meet in the next. Thank you.